Hello and welcome to Camp Xtras. In 1969, the anime film The Wonderful World of Puss in Boots made its Japanese debut and became a beloved Japanese classic. Years later, in 1986, Japan would get its own game on the franchise, but the US would not get it till 4 years after that, giving this game, Puss in Boots: Perrault's Adventure, a long journey to reach the NES. I played through it recently, and let me tell you of its journey and if it was worth it. All footage was captured on a Retron 5. Let's go ahead and hop into this one. The story of Puss in Boots dates back to the 1500s, when the earliest recorded instances of the stories appeared, but the tale wasn't truly popular until Charles Perrault wrote it. In this story, a cat wears boots and is owned by a poor man. Using tricks and being clever, he goes to great lengths to convince the king that his owner is rich, and he does it, giving his owner a better life and a princess. It's a classic tale that through the centuries would become plays and much later movies. So by 1969, the anime, The Wonderful World of Puss in Boots, was released and was a major success and would lead to the animation company Toei adopting Perrault as their mascot. This would lead to a sequel taking place in the Old West, and by 1976, the tales of Perrault would intermingle with the classic tale Around the World in 80 Days, with Puss in Boots Travels Around the World. The success of this film would lead to a Famicom game 10 years later with Puss in Boots: An Adventure Around the World in 80 Days. This was in 1986, and the Famicom had been out for 3 years at this point, but this game was only released in Japan and did not come to America. Yet in 1990, the publishing group Electrobrain entered the world and started getting publishing licenses for old NES games to port them to America. They would obtain Puss in Boots, yet with that they would change it for an American audience, taking the timer away from the game, removing some stages, renaming them, as well as changing the plot in the manual. Along with this, a Captain in the Game Master episode would be created featuring this game to help push the character to America. And with that, it would release in North America in June of 1990. I've had this game in my collection, and I was blind to it until I picked it out the other day, and I thought it had an interesting history, and I played through it. So let me tell you about my experience with it, starting with the gameplay. For a brief rundown of the story, you have to look at the manual, as this game does not make a point about its plot. In this game, your main villain is Count Grumon and Dr. Garigari, who hate Perrault because he saves mice instead of killing them. They send him on a perilous journey in a time machine, but Perrault must kill these bad guys to get back safely. It's an odd plot, but hey, it's a tiny blurb in the manual, and I'm not going to judge it too much on that. Puss in Boots is a side-scroller, and a very basic one at that. You just move around and jump, though there are special stages that we'll get into later. Yet for the most part, you're moving from left to right, jumping on some platforms, and attacking enemies. You get 3 weapons, all of which are switched between in the pause menu. You get a boomerang, which has a wide angle but comes back at you, a bomb which lobs, and a gun that shoots straight forward. Which I will say the gun is the only good weapon in the game. The rest are situational for some bosses at best, where the boomerang can reach the devil's head, and the lob on the bomb can hit a snake boss. Yet enemies on stages generally just need a straight shot to kill. The action is rudimentary at best for most of the game. Sometimes you might hop in a submarine, but the gameplay remains the same. The same could be said about the plane and sailboat levels. They try to add variety here, but they all just feel like you move along with nothing quite to do, making for variety that adds nothing. Normally it's just dodging and shooting, and there is hardly any platforming challenge, not until the very last level. Otherwise, this game is extremely easy. I would say this game is abnormally easy for an NES game. Stages take 2 minutes tops for the most part, and it's a simple walk to the end. Overall, you can beat this game in under 20 minutes if you don't include the final boss. It's one of those games that feels pointless because it gives you so little and barely does anything. Luckily, Perrault's controls are fine. Sometimes I feel like his jump doesn't go off properly, but as far as NES gameplay goes, it does its job. Yet, like I mentioned, the final stage ramps up in difficulty. The platforming here is not hard, but it's at least a challenge, asking you to jump from platform to platform, dodging shots. It was close to fun. But the final boss in this game is the hardest difficulty spike I've ever experienced. Let me tell you, this game is breezy, but this final boss is insane. You're just walking along, and boom, the final boss just appears. They fire an insane amount of bullets at you, and it's unfair for the most part. You pretty much just have to spam fire fire as much as you can off the bat in order to get through this. This is the one time where Pero's health ever felt low in this entire game. Luckily, this game has a continue function, and it starts right at the start of most areas, so it makes trying the final boss over and over again at least somewhat easy. The other stages are fine, but very basic in design and challenge, and then it just all of a sudden gets way too hard. It feels like a game that felt bad that it was so easy that it didn't want you to beat it. It's baffling game design all around, and it makes for a very crude experience as far as gameplay goes. This is an NES platformer, so it's not going to do a ton, but it really doesn't do a ton. With barely any stages, and most of them only lasting a couple minutes, it's just not fun. You have a game that effectively feels like a waste of time and effort. When I started up this game, I had no idea about its history, and I remember thinking, how is this an NES game from 1990? By 1990, NES games were starting to get cleaner and cleaner, and this one feels like a launch title. I had to look it up immediately, which come to find out this game was much older, which makes sense for the basic look of this game. Yet I still don't find that a great excuse, as in 1990, if you were to get this game against the other NES titles that were coming out at the time, I'm sure this was a disappointment to look at, and even if you were going to give it the benefit of the doubt, I still don't think it's a very special looking game. I found many of the levels to feel empty, such as the submarine or sailboat levels. Most of the sprites and backgrounds are extremely plain, giving you nothing to look at. There's hardly ever any enemies on screen, generally one or two, so there's hardly any movement. That is aside from Pero, but his sprite is huge and nothing special. It felt like a game that was made very fast, not only in gameplay, but with the lack of creative detail. Sure, I love that you're in the Old West or in the colonial era, but the game never sells me on that setting. It's just there to facilitate very basic gameplay. Then you get to the Statue of Liberty, which is just a bunch of iron girders. I would say it's a letdown and offers no creativity. The music is cute at least. I found a lot of the tunes here to have a childlike quality to them. I do think by 1990, songs on the NES were starting to get more impressive, but this one's music is very basic instrumentally. Still, I found it catchy, and along with simplistic sound effects, it gave this childlike quality to the game that the gameplay feels like it deserves. Nothing quite special for me to be listening to on their own, but it matched a lot of the fantastical nature the game was striving for. Puss in Boots, despite its cute cover and aesthetic, is pretty much a dud for the NES. Simplistic for 1990, but even for 1986, this game is a mess. Extremely plain visually, with gameplay that's a bore. It's far too easy and short, with a weird difficulty spike in its finale. There is zero pizzazz here, and it feels like a game just thrown together, and to be honest, should have been left in Japan. Bringing this over so late, especially for a game as boring as this, it's just depressing. Puss in Boots is a game I can wholeheartedly not recommend. As this is my first NES review here, I won't be able to rank it, but I can assure you when I do, this one is going to be fairly low. As far as reviews for this one goes, there are none that I could easily find. This game is a bit too old for Metacritic, and looking through review databases, as far as reviews from 1990, I found this hard to find. So I will take that as this not being a great game upon release and was seemingly skipped over. Puss in Boots would see no more games, at least in North America, yet the character still seems to be a purveying classic for Japan, as Toei still uses him as their mascot, despite a sea of hits such as Dragon Ball Z and Sailor Moon. So in some ways, his legacy continues on. Yet Puss in Boots nowadays seems to be a bit of an oddity, but there's not much love for it. Many modern reviewers seem to complain about its ease to play and lack of anything to do. If you look at user aggregate website Backlog, which has over 50 logged plays, it has an extremely low average of 1.9 out of 5, with no scores higher than a 3. The reviews on there are fairly damning, leaving a game that has a pretty bad legacy for the NES. But if you've ever played this one, be sure to let me know in the comments if you loved or hated it. I'd love to hear from you. Be sure to leave a like on this review as it really helps me on the algorithm. Subscribe to keep up with more videos like this, and check out my main channel Camp Xbox for retro Xbox videos, and I'll see you here next time at Camp Xtras.